This is Taiwan Talk.
This is Taiwan Talk on ICRT.
White Fungus is an art magazine founded by two brothers from New Zealand based in Taichung. The magazine recently signed a major distribution deal with London-based company White Cirque, which works with more than 80 distributors in about 100 countries worldwide. I caught up with one of White Fungus's founders, Ron Hanson, at Taipei's Museum of Contemporary Art to talk about what Taiwan's art scene has to offer. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
So, because of this deal, your magazines are going to be in cities all over the world, in Moscow, in London, in Brisbane. And the flip side to that is that people in those cities are going to have a chance to see the work of some Taiwanese artists in places all over the world. But maybe even more exciting than that is some of the other work that you've done. You've actually brought those artists, you've organized events and brought those artists to those cities. Could you talk a little bit about some of those events and what that's been like?
Yeah, well, as well as publishing, we hold a lot of different events around the world, and we've held events in New York, San Francisco. We're about to hold an event in Berlin. And we really enjoy taking Taiwanese artists to these cities and holding events where we mix them in with local artists from that city and present them to new audiences. And that's something we really enjoy doing, and we want to do this all over the world, so people really are up on the play when it comes to Taiwan art.
I think that the success of your magazine is a sign that people are really interested in the art scene in Taiwan. What do you think is behind that interest? What do you think people are finding here in Taiwan that is keeping them coming back?
Well, I mean, in a general sense, people are interested in art in Asia. I mean, there's just a huge growth of the industry in Asia. I think the Asian industry, the art scene is growing and before long could eventually be the dominant scene. It's still, New York and Europe, are still the dominant places, but the scene here is rising, and Taiwan is a key part of it.
What do you think that observers of art are finding in Taiwan that they haven't found in other places, that they haven't seen before?
Stories, unique stories. We really are in a globalized world now where everything's so connected, but Taiwan is one of these interesting places where it's been in between major shifts. During the Cold War, it was a really pivotal place in the Cold War, and it suffered from that at times, and it's been through all sorts of waves of colonization, and now Taiwan is at a really interesting point where it's kind of where the East meets the West, and with the rise of China, it's a really key place to be, and so I think people are interested in the story of Taiwan is the story of the world. And it's an interesting perspective to view these shifts from.
How do Taiwanese artists engage with that history?
Well, some Taiwanese artists are really involved and engaged, and others are less engaged. But I'm in particular, I'm a huge fan of two Taipei artists, Chen Jie-ren and Yao Rei-jong. Now, Chen Jie-ren, he deals with a lot of the historical shifts in Taiwan. He's particularly interested in the sort of wave of neoliberal economics, which has seen a lot of factories move to mainland China. A lot of people lose their jobs. He did a work called Factory, where he made a video where he took former employees of an actual textile factory, took them back to the empty building where they once worked, and got them to reenact their previous duties. And what had happened there is this factory had moved, and these people had pensions that were owed to them, and they weren't paid, and they were still unemployed. And so he's telling stories of marginal figures who have get left behind in these massive shifts. Another artist, Yao Rei-jong.
So what was his art?
He made a video work of this. So he took these people back, who worked them, got them to reenact their old routines, and he just got them to run through it, and he filmed it. He's got this incredible use of the camera where it's just these really slow, long takes, and he creates these video installations. So they're like huge video screens, but you often go and experience it in a gallery space, and you can sit down on the floor and just get really immersed within it. Another artist, Yao Rei-jong, he is really interested in some of the shifts and often takes a parodic kind of approach that brings a lot of humour. For example, in 1997, he did a work called Recovering Mainland China, whereas, Yao Rei-jong was one of the generation of artists who was still taught in Taiwan that that Taiwan was eventually going to retake mainland China. That was the official policy. So after he had done his compulsory military service, he went to China wearing his uniform and posed in front of a lot of different historic monuments as if he was there, a one-man army, there to actually carry out the government policy. He told me that once he was actually travelling to China and he had this work in his bag and he got stuck at customs and people were like, what's the deal with this? And it took him a while to explain that this is just art. He's not actually really going there to retake the mainland. But that's quite an interesting sort of an example of how he engages with Taiwan's historical reality, which it can be described as absurd. I mean, there's an absurdity to it.
Do you think that that's pretty common in Taiwan for artists to be involved in public life?
It is with some artists, and in the 1990s there was a wave of what was called Taiwanization. It was after the martial law period, and artists were really interested in exploring a lot of suppressed histories of Taiwan. A lot of artists were dealing with Aboriginal cultures and just these hidden histories, and that was a time of great engagement. And then in the 2000s, a lot of the younger artists coming up weren't as interested in that. They were more concerned, more sort of following trends of, global art trends, things that they picked up on the internet and so forth. But I think there's a re-emergence now. There's almost a new wave of artists starting to become interested in this. And an example I would give is the artist Betty Apple, who's an artist we've worked with a lot and I think is going to be a huge star. Just give her a little bit of time and I think it's going to be great for Taiwan. But, she's very involved in the nuclear movement, which is obviously the anti-nuclear movement, which is obviously huge here, and she's helped organise protest actions, and she's made music dealing with it, and so I think there is a new wave of Taiwanese artists that is becoming more engaged with that. Taiwan is a really complicated and a very complicated political and historical conundrum, you could say, and there's just a lot of material there, and people are used to having to contest things here. They're used to having to resist and really work hard to maintain your own identity and autonomy amongst all these larger forces that can wash over a small island like this.
One form of art that's really taken off in Taiwan is sound art. Can you talk a little bit about what that art is and why it's been so successful in Taiwan?
It's really flourishing in Taiwan. There's a couple organizations that organize stuff. Candela Records and Lacking Sound Festival regularly hold events. There's a gallery called The Cube, which supports a lot of stuff. Taipei Contemporary Arts Centre is very open to it. So there's the institutional support, and there's a large number of artists. Now, sound art, it's been developing since the early 20th century, and artists experimenting with atonal structures, going beyond melody, beyond, the sort of hegemony of the song, and dealing with different sort of textures of sound that come from often industrial machinery, or sometimes taking field recordings. There's an artist, Yannick Dorby, who's actually a French artist but lives in Taipei, and he likes to go into the countryside and record animal sounds and Aboriginal cultures. So there's sound art can really run the full gamut, from dealing with technology and glitches in technology and unintended purposes of technology to field recordings of traditional life and nature and so forth. A few years back, Amy Chang, who's a very important curator here, curated the Venice Biennale Pavilion for Taiwan, and it was dedicated to sound art. Now, I think that's a really bold move for a small country to undertake, to say we're going to dedicate our national representation at Venice, which the Venice Biennale is the biggest contemporary art event in the world, and we're going to say we're going to focus our energies on sound art. So that was just huge. A really pivotal figure in Taiwan is Wong Fu-rei. I mean, we're at MoCA Taipei right now. Fu-rei just had a solo exhibition here just a short time ago, and he's just going nuts this year. He's done performances in Austria, in New York, Berlin, Hong Kong, Tokyo.
And what's his art like?
Well, he does installations. He had a lot of light installations and sound installations at MoCA, and he does noise performances. Wong Fu-rei is considered the godfather of Taiwan noise and sound art. He went to San Francisco in the early 90s, mid-90s, and studied at the Art Institute of San Francisco, and there was a lot of noise going on at the time, and he was picking up on this, and then he came back to Taiwan. He started the first ever publication about sound art called Noise. He started a record label and started releasing recordings, and he is also the head of the Sound and Technology Lab at Taiwan National University of the Arts. And so most of the big young artists have formerly been his students. So he's really just a huge figure, and now he's just really exploding on the world stage. We actually took him back to San Francisco this year, for a performance at the Lab, which is a sound art venue in San Francisco. So Fu-rei's a really huge figure and a major force for why this is happening. Another really thing to point out this year, a Taipei artist, Hong Kai-Wong, was included in an exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the first ever major exhibition of sound art at the Museum of Modern Art, which is, of course, the world's biggest art museum for contemporary art and modern art. So she was part of that and, got a huge amount of publicity for it. So I think it's the result of, some people have really laid down some hard work. And then, of course, we come along and we've discovered that people are interested in this all over the world. So we've got a chance to take these artists all over the world and say, hey, this is really happening in Taiwan. I mean, I think people in other parts of Asia are starting to take notice. They're like, oh, it's kind of exciting in Taiwan for sound art now because it's getting more developed and there's just a hunger and an energy which you sometimes find lacking in the West where it's been going for longer. There's not that same drive. Here there's a real drive to get it done, and I'm just so excited to see what's already happened and to see what can happen in the next few years building on this groundwork.
All right, well, thanks so much for speaking with us today.
Thank you.
We've been speaking to Ron Hanson, editor and co-director of White Fungus magazine. To close out the podcast today, we're going to play a clip of some of the sound art made by one of the artists mentioned during the interview. This is just a little taste of a track by Betty Apple, titled "It Was Power That Corrupted Them." You can find more of her work at bettyapple.com. To learn more about White Fungus magazine, you can visit them online at whitefungus.com. Thanks for listening in. For Taiwan Talk, I'm Keith Manconi.